So, just doing some final assembly on this new head. So, I've fitted my plug, and then I've JB welded the thread, and then put another plug of JB weld sitting on the back. So I'm just holding the cylinder head in this position for a while for that to harden off. I've fitted the exhaust studs and Loctited all those in. So all the valves are in place, all very nice, all worked out quite well. And what I'm doing just now, so I've fitted all the valves, all the valve guide seals, the lower valve seat, the collets and shims, etc. And I'm just on the last one. So when Buzzard did all these shims, and then if you remember, I then did a check measurement, a crude check measurement, and I got some pretty big valve clearances, up to 11th thou in places. So what I head for is 0.15 millimeters valve clearance, which is 6th thou, which is miles off these. So they've then gone and done a few calculations and adjusted and put in different size shims than he used. So I've gone up at least a shim size, maybe 2 in some cases, and in others, like this exhaust number 4, I've stuck with it because he got just about the right, well, 0.178. You can't get closer than that using the shims to 0.15, so I'm keeping that at the shim at 2.65. So the other thing he said was, all your buckets are worn. This is what he said on the phone to me just before I picked it up, and said ideally you should replace all your buckets. So I've measured every single bucket diameter with a micrometer. It's an imperial micrometer, so they have converted it to millimeters, and they're all pretty close. Not a hell of a lot of difference between all of them. And he said that some of them were 0.25 of a millimeter down. I said, what? I said, 1/4 of a millimeter. They've worn 1/4 of a millimeter in the diameter is. He was, oh yeah, they're way out. No. 0.0254 1/1000ths is the biggest difference between any of these buckets. So the biggest one is 33.0073, and the smallest one is about 9819, 32.9819. So yeah, thou of difference. So I've got some other Zed Head buckets, which have the recess in the top for the big shim, for the standard shim, and I measured some of those as well, and guess what, they come out exactly the same to these. Okay, and so then I've looked up a spec of what these should be, and it's a very hard spec to find. It's nothing in Haynes manuals, of course. In fact, maybe he worked for Haynes. Only a factor of 10 out. This guy was an engineer with British Airways, by the way. Alarm. Yeah, so only a factor of 10 out. Don't worry about that. Nothing to be alarmed about. So, yeah, I'm not going to be worried about them. I did find a kind of spec which said if they're 33 mil OD, you're fine, and we're pretty much fucking there. Some of them are slightly over 33. So there you go. I would imagine they're supposed to be 1.3 inches in diameter, all round about there. But anyway, can't really find too much of a spec. Found a general spec, and I think they're fine. So I've just got to finish putting that last shim and bucket in, then I've got to fit my crappy inlet rubbers, but I've got to do some work on those first, which I've just remembered. And then something that you probably haven't seen was last week I refitted the piston rings, and yeah, basically base gasket. So that's the standard Cometic 0.5mm base gasket. So I've gone to, my base gasket is now a third the thickness it was, and that's because I've got a much better head which hasn't been skimmed 1,000 times. Got my new APE stroke Liska idle sprockets in there, all 300 quid's worth of them. So obviously the gasket's got to go down on here. So I did put some RTV on the base of this base gasket, and that's why I've just put this down, just clamped this down over the last week. So obviously once that head's ready to go on, it's a case of taking these off, getting the head gasket on. I've got to insert the little rubbers that go in here to hold these shafts in place. Head gasket on, head on, torque that down, then start putting the cams in and checking the valve clearances again with the cams installed and roughly timed. And then once I've got all the valve clearances correct, I will set the timing, because remember, valve clearances will affect your valve timing, so they've got to be right before you do your timing, basically. So yeah, we're getting closer and closer, basically, to getting this beast running again with hopefully a decent cylinder head.